Welcome to the Deep Dive. Think about children you've known, maybe even yourself as a child. Some kids, they seem perfectly fine on the outside, maybe even doing really well. But underneath, there can be this quiet struggle, right? A deep feeling of not really being seen.
Absolutely.
So today we're diving into something really crucial. The inner world of adults who grew up with, well, emotional neglect.
Yeah, it's a topic that it doesn't always get the attention it deserves. When people think about childhood difficulties, the mind often jumps to more obvious things.
Like physical things, maybe.
Exactly. Physical abuse or maybe overt verbal abuse.
Yeah.
But emotional neglect, this absence of having your emotional needs seen, understood, met, that can be a really significant form of early adversity.
Right. So it's not about something bad happening to you necessarily.
Not in the active sense, no.
It's more about something essential that didn't happen. Like the caregiver just wasn't tuned in consistently to your inner world. They didn't help you name or validate or even understand your own feelings.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Dr. Jonas Webb put it really well, I think. She said something like, this isn't something that happened to you. It's something that didn't happen.
That's powerful. Something that didn't happen.
It really is. So let's dig into that. What does that didn't happen actually mean for, say, your development? Starting maybe with the brain itself.
Okay, yeah. Because our brains are just sponges in those early years, aren't they? How does that lack of emotional mirroring, you called it, how does that actually shape brain development around emotions?
Well, you're right. Those early years, say birth to around 7, are incredibly formative. Your brain is actively figuring out emotions based on interactions. When you feel something happy, sad, angry, ideally, a responsive caregiver would sort of reflect that back.
Like, oh, you seem frustrated.
Exactly like that, helping you label it, understand it. That mirroring process is just...
Well, it's fundamental for building a healthy emotional framework in the brain. Now, research suggests, there's work by Teicher and others, it indicates that without that consistent positive emotional feedback, certain brain areas can be affected. Which areas?
Specifically the amygdala, that's your quick response center for threats and big emotions. It might become, let's say, more easily triggered, a bit hypersensitive.
Okay.
And at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which is key for managing those emotions, for thinking things through, its development, its connections might not become as robust.
So if that early mirroring is missing, it could leave you as an adult with a nervous system that's maybe a bit more on high alert.
That's a good way to put it. More on edge, perhaps.
Yeah.
You might find it harder to really recognize the subtle shades of your own feelings, or maybe even read others' emotions accurately. And regulating your own reactions. That can definitely be tougher. And this plays out, in different ways. Some people might tend to withdraw in relationships, kind of pull back to feel safe.
Self-protection.
Right. While others might find themselves having reactions that feel, well, bigger than the situation seems to warrant.
It sounds like you weren't given the basic toolkit for navigating your own emotional landscape.
Right.
And it seems logical then that these early experiences would heavily influence how you connect with other people later on, right? Attachment styles must come into play here.
Oh, absolutely. Those first relationships with caregivers are really the blueprint for adult attachment. And emotional neglect, it very often leads towards what we call insecure attachment patterns.
Okay.
So one common one is anxious attachment. People with this style often crave closeness. They really want connection, but they're also haunted by this deep fear of abandonment.
So they might need a lot of reassurance.
A lot of reassurance, yeah.
Yeah.
They might worry constantly about the relationship's stability, sometimes feeling like they're too much or too needy for their partner.
Okay, I can picture that. What about the opposite reaction? How does neglect lead to an avoidant style?
Well, avoidant attachment often develops as a way to cope when emotional availability just wasn't reliable. If expressing needs didn't get you anywhere or maybe felt unsafe.
You learn to shut them down?
Exactly. You learn to suppress those needs, keep people at arm's length emotionally. So as adults, they might struggle with trust, really value independence, almost to the point where intimacy itself feels risky, threatening even. There can be this underlying belief like, I don't really need anyone.
And then there's the one that sounds really complex. Disorganized or fearful attachment. What's going on there?
Yeah, disorganized, sometimes called fearful avoidant.
Yeah.
That often stems from caregiving that was inconsistent, maybe even frightening. So the child learns that the person they need for safety is also a source of fear or unpredictability.
That sounds incredibly confusing for a child.
It is. So as adults, there's this intense push-pull in relationships. They desperately want closeness, but they're also terrified of it because connection has been linked to pain or chaos in the past. They feel stuck.
Wanting connection but expecting hurt.
Precisely. It's a very difficult internal conflict.
So these early experiences really do lay down the tracks for how we relate, how much we trust, what we expect from others. These attachment styles become almost like our default operating system for relationships.
That's a great analogy, your default operating system.
Mm-hmm.
And it affects everything how you act, sure, but also your deeper needs, your expectations, how you cope when things get tough in a relationship.
Okay, let's turn inwards now. If your feelings are constantly ignored or dismissed as a kid, what message does that send you about your own worth, it feels like? Well, if my feelings don't matter to the people who are supposed to care most.
Then maybe I don't matter.
Exactly. Does it really go that deep?
It often does, yes. That consistent invalidation of your inner reality can absolutely create a core wound. The unspoken message gets internalized. My feelings are unimportant, therefore I am unimportant. And that can profoundly damage your self-esteem, your sense of identity as you grow up.
So how might that show up in adult life? What would someone wrestling with that legacy actually experience day to day?
Well, you might see struggles with decision-making. Even small choices can feel overwhelming.
Why is that?
It often comes from that lack of internal validation early on. If your feelings weren't treated as reliable guides, you don't learn to trust them. So you look outside yourself for answers.
Which leads to that need for external validation you mentioned.
Exactly. A constant search for approval from others to feel okay, to feel worthy. You might see patterns of overworking, perfectionism, always chasing the next achievement, hoping that will finally make you feel enough.
That sounds exhausting. Always looking outside for something you need inside.
It is exhausting. And often, even when they achieve things others admire, there's still this nagging, persistent feeling of inadequacy underneath, like you're an imposter or just fundamentally flawed. And beyond that, emotional neglect can really get in the way of developing a clear sense of self. You might struggle to know what you truly value, what your interests are, what actually brings you joy. It's like that inner compass.
Never got calibrated?
Right. It never fully formed. Or it's hard to read, who am I really? What do I want? Those could be really difficult questions.
Wow. It paints a picture of a really fragile inner world, doesn't it? Often depending on external feedback just to feel okay. So how does all this play out in actual relationships with partners, friends, colleagues?
Well, all those things we've discussed, the attachment patterns, the shaky self-worth, the difficulty with emotional regulation, they create predictable challenges across all kinds of relationships.
Not just romantic ones.
Oh, no. Friendships, family dynamics, work relationships, even how you parent your own children, it ripples out.
Can you give some examples? What might these challenges look like?
Sure. One very common pattern is excessive accommodation, always putting others' needs first, ignoring your own.
People-pleasing.
People-pleasing, exactly. Right. Often driven by a fear of conflict or rejection, or maybe hoping that if you just take care of everyone else, then you'll finally feel valued. But it usually just leads to resentment and burnout.
I can see that. What else?
In intimate relationships, you might see that avoidance we talked about, keeping distance to avoid getting hurt. Or the flip side, becoming overly attached, very anxious about the connection, maybe prone to jealousy or neediness.
That push-pull again?
Sometimes, yes. In work settings, maybe difficulty setting boundaries, saying no, asking for what you need, which can lead to feeling taken advantage of.
Right.
And with parenting, if your own emotional needs weren't met, it can sometimes be harder to tune into your own child's emotional world effectively. Not always, of course, but it can be a challenge.
So these early experiences really cast a long shadow, but it's not a life sentence, right? The outline mentions post-traumatic growth. What's that about?
Absolutely not a life sentence. Post-traumatic growth is this really hopeful concept. It acknowledges that humans have this incredible capacity not just to survive difficult experiences, but to actually be transformed by them in positive ways.
So turning the pain into something constructive.
Exactly. Instead of being defined by the neglect, you integrate the experience and use it as fuel for developing greater strength, deeper self-awareness, maybe more meaningful relationships, resilience.
Okay, that's really encouraging. So how do you get there? What helps someone heal from these invisible wounds? What are the tools?
Well, therapy is often a really important part of the journey. There are specific types that can be very helpful, like schema therapy, which really looks at those deep-rooted life patterns, often starting in childhood.
Okay.
EMDR is another one. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing it can be powerful for processing specific hurts or memories. And IFS, internal family systems, helps you understand and work with the different parts of yourself.
Like the wounded child part.
Precisely. Connecting with and nurturing that inner child part is often a key piece of healing work, whether inside or outside formal therapy.
Are there things people can do on their own, too, in their daily lives?
Definitely. Building emotional awareness is huge. Just learning to notice, identify, and name your feelings as they happen without judging them.
Just noticing, okay, I feel anxious right now.
Yes. And alongside that, developing self-compassion. Learning to treat yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who was struggling. That can be incredibly healing.
Instead of the inner critic that may be developed from the neglect.
Exactly. Replacing that critical voice with a compassionate one.
Yeah.
And also, seeking out and nurturing genuinely healthy relationships. Relationships where you do feel seen, heard, and validated can provide corrective emotional experiences. They help you relearn what safe connection feels like.
So it's like actively giving yourself the understanding and support that was missing back then. And a huge part of that seems to be this idea of being seen not just by others, but by yourself.
That's really the crux of it, self-recognition. While having supportive people is wonderful, the most profound healing often starts from within. It's about you consciously recognizing your own value.
Telling yourself, you matter.
Yes. Whispering that affirmation, you are valuable, to that inner part of you. Maybe the very message you never got. It's about acknowledging your own feelings, even the hard ones, with acceptance, not judgment. Meeting yourself with compassion.
Like becoming your own nurturing parent, in a way.
That's a perfect way to put it. Reparenting yourself to build that internal foundation of emotional safety and self-worth that maybe wasn't built externally.
This has been, well, incredibly insightful, really shedding light on something often hidden. If we were to summarize the key takeaway from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the core message is that emotional neglect, even though it leaves no visible marks, is a genuine and significant form of early adversity. It shapes your attachment, your relationships, your view of yourself in really profound ways.
Yeah.
And it often leaves behind this sort of invisible child inside, still yearning for that connection, still quietly crying out, see me, understand me, hold me.
And just acknowledging that inner voice, hearing that cry, even if it's painful, that's the beginning, isn't it? That's the courageous first step.
It absolutely is. Because once you turn towards that part of yourself, you're no longer alone with the pain.
That invisible child isn't quite so isolated anymore.
Exactly. Because you are there now. You're learning to see and nurture yourself.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's incredibly important work. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
If this conversation resonated with you, if it sparked some understanding, please do subscribe to our channel for more deep dives like this. Give this one a like if it was helpful, and definitely turn on those notifications so you don't miss our future explorations.